Dearest friends, this third session will be concerned with the time after the ascension of Baha'u'llah. In Baha'u'llah's most holy book, the Kitab-i-Aqdas, he has written, "When the ocean of my presence hath ebbed, and the book of my revelation is ended, turn your faces toward him whom God hath purposed, who hath branched from this ancient root." Later, in his Will and Testament, Baha'u'llah quoted that verse from the Kitab-i-Aqdas and said, "The object of this sacred verse is none other except the most mighty branch, Abdu'l Baha. Thus have we graciously revealed unto you our potent will, and I am verily the gracious, the all-powerful." The Will and Testament of Abdu'l Baha we know as the Kitab-i-Adi, the Book of the Covenant. Shoghi Effendi has summed up its contents on pages 239 and 240 of God Passes By. Here is the greater part of what the Guardian says. In this weighty and incomparable document, its author discloses the character of that excellent and priceless heritage bequeathed by him to his heirs, proclaims afresh the fundamental purpose of his revelation, enjoins the peoples of the world to hold fast to that which will elevate their station, announces to them that God hath forgiven what is past. Also, Baha'u'llah directs in particular the Agsan, his sons, to ponder the mighty force and the consummate power that lieth concealed in the world of being. He bids them, moreover, together with the Afnan, the Bab's kindred, and his own relatives, to turn, one and all, unto the most great branch, Abdu'l Baha, identifies him with the one whom God hath purposed, who hath branched from this pre-existent root referred to in the Kitab-i-Aqdas, ordains the station of the greater branch, Mirza Muhammad Ali, to be beneath that of the most great branch, Abdu'l Baha. He exhorts the believers to treat the Agsan with consideration and affection, counsels them to respect his family and relatives, as well as the kindred of the Bab, denies his sons any right to the property of others, warns all men not to allow the means of order to be made the cause of confusion, and the instrument of union an occasion for discord, and concludes with an exhortation calling upon the faithful to serve all nations and to strive for the betterment of the world. In the tablet of the branch, Baha'u'llah wrote, "There hath blanched from the Sadrat al-Muntaha this sacred and glorious being, this branch of holiness. Well is it with him that hath sought his shelter, and abideth beneath his shadow. Verily, the limb of the law of God hath sprung forth from this root, which God hath firmly implanted in the ground of his will, and whose branch hath been so uplifted as to encompass the whole of creation. Magnified be he, therefore, in this sublime, this mighty, this blessed, this exalted handiwork. A word hath, as a token of our grace, gone forth from the most great tablet, a word which God hath adorned with the ornament of his own self, and made it sovereign over all the earth and all that is therein, and a sign of his greatness and power among its people. Render thanks unto God, O people, for his appearance. For verily, he is the most great favor unto you, the most perfect bounty upon you, and through him every mouldering bone is quickened. Whoso turneth towards him hath turned towards God, and whoso turneth away from him hath turned away from my beauty, have repudiated my proof and transgressed against me. He is the trust of God amongst you, his charge within you, his manifestation unto you, and his appearance among his favored servants. We have sent him down in the form of a human temple. Blessed and sanctified be God, who hath created whatsoever he willeth, through his inviolable, his infallible decree. They who deprive themselves of the shadow of the branch are lost in the wilderness of error, are consumed by the heat of worldly desires, and are those who will assuredly perish. That tablet was revealed by Baha'u'llah in Adrianople, addressed to Mirza Ali Riza, a Baha'i of Khorasan, the province in eastern Persia famed in the Baha'i dispensation. His brother, also a Baha'i, was a minister of state in Khorasan. Dearest friends, this is the third session and will take us from the ascension of Baha'u'llah until Abdu'l Baha becomes free after the Young Turk Revolution in 1908-1909. There are three documents which support each other and make it perfectly clear that Abdu'l Baha is the appointed successor of Baha'u'llah, that he is the interpreter of Baha'u'llah's teachings and the center of his covenant. And you heard Marian read so beautifully extracts from two of them, the Kitab-i Aqdas and the Kitab-i Adi. There is also the tablet of the branch. We all know what the Kitab-i Aqdas is. It is Baha'u'llah's most holy book. The Kitab-i Adi, I think that Kitab-al-Ad actually means Book of the Covenant, and perhaps we know it also as Baha'u'llah's Will and Testament. And the tablet of the branch was revealed in Adrianople to Mirza Ali Riza, a Baha'i of Khorasan, in the province of eastern Persia. Some of you will remember that he is a very well-known person. His brother, also a Baha'i, was a minister of state in Khorasan. I mention that because the tablet of the branch is an integral part of the covenant of Baha'u'llah, of which Abdu'l Baha is the center. Now, you may wonder where to find these things. The Kitab-i Aqdas, as I mentioned, we all know, but the Kitab-i Adi and the Tablet of the Branch are in a compilation called The Revelation of Baha'u'llah, Baha'i Publishing Trust, and some of us hope very much that that compilation will be republished because it has excellent things in it. Baha'u'llah had entrusted his will and testament to the care of Abdu'l Baha before his passing. And on the 9th day after his ascension, its contents were made known. Earlier in the day, Abdu'l Baha had gathered together 9 Baha'is, including members of Baha'u'llah's family, to witness the breaking of the seal of the testament and for them to learn the contents of it. And later that day, the family and the friends met in the shrine of Baha'u'llah, and Mirza Majduddin stood up and read the will. He was the son of Mirza Musa, whom you will remember from the past, the faithful brother of Baha'u'llah. Meanwhile, Mirza Musa had died. Now, it was quite clear from the Kitabi Adi, to whom the Baha'is had to turn, whom they had to obey, and upon whose shoulders the mantle of total authority now rested. Everyone there heard that Abdu'l Baha was a successor of Baha'u'llah and accepted that. I think most of us knew the Hand of the Cause of God, Tarazullah Samandari. Mr. Samandari was a youth of 16 in the last period of Baha'u'llah's life, and he had the bounty of staying in the Holy Land for 6 months as a pilgrim. He was there when Baha'u'llah ascended, and later he vividly recalled the day when the Kitabi Adi was read. Mr. Samandari spent 15 days of the month of fasting in 1968. It was his last time of the month of fasting. Actually, he died before the next one came round. And Mr. Samandari stayed with us in the Hazrat al-Quds in London. And through an interpreter, he spoke of those days. There is no doubt that unquestionable obedience was accorded to Abdu'l Baha at that time of Baha'u'llah's passing. But that canker of envy and jealousy that had ruined Mirza Yahya stirred in the heart of Baha'u'llah's second son, the greater branch mentioned in the will, Mirza Muhammad Ali. And in the same way that Sayyid Muhammad of Isfahan had spurred on Mirza Yahya, the very person who had read the will of Baha'u'llah in public in the shrine of Baha'u'llah, Mirza Majd Din, egged on Muhammad Ali through all the ensuing years. One day, Abdu'l Baha told that man that he would have a long life. He would live on racked with miseries, welcoming death, but that he would not die until the day that he would have seen for himself in this world the total defeat of all his schemes. And Abdu'l Baha's prophecy was fulfilled. Mirza Majd-Din lived to be more than 100 years old. But at the end, he was unable to move and he couldn't speak. But he could see. He lived in the house of the Covenant Breakers that no longer exists, but once stood next to the mansion of Baji, and he lingered on until 1955. He saw, where he lay, Shaghi Effendi create for the shrine of Baha'u'llah the beauty that befitted that holy place. And the Baha'i world community expanded in those years until it covered the face of the earth. In 1953, the Guardians' 10-year crusade began, and the Knights of Baha'u'llah moved into position in every continent, country, and island group. The covenant triumphed, and it goes on to greater and greater victory. Now there's just a little thing, and I'm going to ask Alan's permission for this. I don't know what I'm going to do now if he says no. But some of you may be wondering who or what are Knights of Baha'u'llah, and what do they do? Well, naturally they are Baha'is, men and women, and what do they do? May I tell them, Alan, what the Knight of Baha'u'llah to the Shetland Islands did? She brought Alan into the world. She was Brigitte Hasselblad, and she was a midwife. She was an Estonian, And Shoghi Effendi was very anxious that she return to Estonia. And he said that Alan's mother could be the pioneer in the Shetlands and release Brigitte. Now I want to give you the good news that Brigitte is back in Tallinn in Estonia. That's the life of a Knight of Baha'u'llah. But Muhammad Ali was the son of Baha'u'llah. And can you imagine what that meant to the friends and also to people who are not Baha'i and people in high places? Many Baha'is themselves could in no way think that a son of Baha'u'llah had the makings of a traitor. They were confused and perplexed. And that confusion, which we mentioned yesterday, continued in the minds of many over many, many years because of the trouble in the Holy Family itself. As the years went by, some 40 members of Baha'u'llah's own family, relatives of the Bab, and prominent figures and teachers of the course became covenant breakers. Abdu'l Baha was isolated in Akka with his sister, Bahir Khanum, his 4 daughters, his wife, and an old uncle. He was even prevented from entering the shrine of Baha'u'llah. Because they lived at Baji in the lifetime of Baha'u'llah and stayed on there, were in possession of the mansion of Baji, the shrine, and the nearby houses. Despite all his attempts, Abdu'l Baha was unable to protect and to heal those who plotted against him. He even reminded Muhammad Ali that after his own passing, all that he desired would come to him. Muhammad Ali replied that he had no guarantee that he would outlive Abdu'l Baha. In fact, he did outlive the master by 16 years. He died in 1937, a broken man. One of the things of which the covenant breakers accused Abdu'l Baha was that he placed himself in the same station as Baha'u'llah. And it was at that time that Abdu'l Baha, who was known as Abbas Effendi to the authorities, known to the Baha'is as the most great branch and called Akka by most people, it was at that time that he declared that he was to be known as Abdu'l Baha, the servant of Baha. He stated that his station was a station of servitude. But even in 1914, after his travels in the West, Abdu'l Baha was saying the same thing. And I thought you might be very interested in that, because on January 17th, 1914, Abdu'l Baha spoke to the friends in the Holy Land. And he said, "Tonight, I desire to speak to you on a most important subject, which you must engrave on the tablets of your hearts, like unto the engraving of pictures on adamantine rock, to the extent that you may never forget it, and as you travel through life will relate it to the believers of God. It is this: the holy divine manifestations are unique and peerless. They are the archetypes of celestial and spiritual values in their own age and cycle. They stand on the summit of the Mount of Vision, and they foreshadow the perfections of the evolving humanity. For example, during the dispensation of His Holiness Moses, peace be upon him, there was not a single human soul similar or like unto him. He surpassed all the holy souls who came after him, even the hosts of the Israelitish prophets. In a similar manner, all the people who lived during the cycle of His Holiness Christ, may my life be a sacrifice to him, were under his spiritual authority. They had no will of their own. He was the sun, and the others were the lamps. He was unique and peerless, the center and focal point of the mighty forces. Everyone else was under his shadow. He was the orb, and the others were the stars. He was also unique and peerless. Everyone caught the rays of light from him, and was enkindled through his fire. In a like manner was the epoch of His Holiness the Bab. May my life be naught else but a ransom to him. And he was matchless and without a peer. All the rivers received their strength from that great sea. Finally, during the cycle of the Blessed Perfection Baha'u'llah, may my life be a sacrifice to his believers, all are beneath his shadow. He is the unique and peerless one till the next manifestation. It is, however, not definite that it will be 1,000 years. It may be 2,000 or 10,000 or 20,000 years. But it is definite that for the coming 1,000 years there will appear no manifestation. For 1,000 years there shall arise no sun. All the appearances will be beneath the shade of the most great appearance. They will be as stars of guidance. All of them shall gather around this fountain of life. All of them will become illumined by the rays of this sun. All of them will receive a share and a portion from his great sea. All of them will become vivified with this soul imparting breeze, and all of them will be under the downpour of this rain. The aim is this. His Holiness the Bab gave the glad tidings concerning the appearance of the manifestation of God. And His Holiness the Blessed Perfection was the promised one of all the nations and religions. The Bab was the morning star, heralding the glorious dawn of the Sun of Reality. Now, all of us are under its shadow and receive the refulgent bestowals from it. I am Abdu'l Baha, and no more. I am not pleased with whomsoever praises me with any other title. I am the servant at the threshold of the Blessed Perfection, and I hope that this servitude of mine will become acceptable. Whosoever mentions any other name save this will not please me at all. Abdu'l Baha, and no more. No person must praise me except by this name, Abdu'l Baha. While the situation in the East deteriorated because of the covenant breakers, the West began to open up to the faith. In the lifetime of Baha'u'llah, the Bahá'í Faith had been known in the West, well known, through the Western diplomats who were in the Middle East, and through Western poets, writers, and artists. In 1871, Matthew Arnold wrote an essay that he called A Persian Passion Play, in which he spoke of the Bab. This is what he wrote. Count Gobineau, formerly Minister of France at Tehran and at Athens, published a few years ago an interesting book on the present state of religion and philosophy in Central Asia. The chief purpose of his book is to give a history of the career of Mirza Ali Muhammad, the founder of Babism, of which most people in England have at least heard the name. In 1893, there was a Columbian exposition that was held in Chicago, and it was to celebrate the 4th centenary of the discovery of America. On September 23rd, in a session of the World's Parliaments of Religions, the Reverend George A. Ford, who was a Presbyterian missionary in Syria, read a paper prepared by another missionary there. You've heard his name probably, the Reverend Henry H. Jessup. And the Reverend Ford was the first person to mention the name of Baha'u'llah and to quote his words in a large gathering of people in the West. You will recognize his reference to the visit of Professor E.G. Brown that he made to Baha'u'llah in Baji in the spring of 1890. The paper read at that exhibition closed with these words, and they are from Mr. Berlioz's book, Abdu'l Baha, on page 64. And this is what the paper closed with. In the palace of Baji, or Delight, just outside the fortress of Akka on the Syrian coast, there died a few months ago a famous Persian sage, the Babi saint, named Baha'u'llah, which means the glory of God, the head of that vast reform party of Persian Muslims who accept the New Testament as the word of God and Christ as the deliverer of men, who regard all nations as one and all men as brothers. 3 years ago, he was visited by a Cambridge scholar and gave utterance to sentiments so noble, so Christ-like, that we repeat them as our closing words. And here is the quotation: that all nations should become one in faith and all men as brothers, that the bond of affection and unity between the sons of men should be strengthened, that diversity of religions should cease, and differences of races be annulled. What harm is there in this? Yet so it shall be. These fruitless strifes, these ruinous wars shall pass away, and the most great peace shall come. Do not you in Europe need this also? Let not a man glory in this, that he loves his country. Let him rather glory in this, that he loves his kind. In February 1894, Dr. Ibrahim George Kairullah moved from New York, where he had been for 2 years, to Chicago. Dr. Kairullah was a Christian Arab born in a mountain village in the Lebanon. He was educated at the Syrian Protestant College in Beirut. You may know that in 1920 that college became the American University of Beirut, and the British Baha'i community had a link with it for a long time because Professor Zain, who occupied the chair of history there, was a frequent visitor to the United Kingdom, and some of you may well remember Professor Zain. Dr. Kairullah was one of the first medical graduates from that college. He went to Egypt, and he chanced upon the Baha'is in Cairo, and he accepted the faith in Baha'u'llah's own lifetime. In fact, he received a tablet from Baha'u'llah. And when he thought of emigrating to the United States, and many young people from Syria and particularly from Lebanon did go to the United States, when he was thinking of doing that, he wrote to Abdu'l-Bahá and received the master's approval. And he arrived in New York in December 1892. But it was in Chicago, a few months after Baha'u'llah's name had been mentioned in public, that he began to teach the course. Now, can you see how steadily the faith begins to develop in the West? It was in 1894 also that Thornton Chase became the first American to accept the faith. Now, he had seen Abdu'l Baha in Akka when the master's life was in danger. When he returned home, he wrote a remarkable book which he called In Galilee. And speaking of the master, he said, Abdu'l Baha, he is the master. He is the Christ spirit of this great age. He is the anointed one, the appointed of his Father. That Father was the greatest manifestation of God, Baha'u'llah. He is the center of the covenant, the healer and satisfier of longing hearts, the king of servitude to humanity. In 1912, when Abdu'l Baha went to America, Thornton Chase lay on his deathbed. And when the master reached the Pacific coast, he was already in the Abha kingdom. But Abdu'l Baha visited his grave in Inglewood Cemetery in Los Angeles. And standing there, the master said this: "This revered personage was the first Baha'i in America. He served the cause faithfully, and his services will ever be remembered throughout future ages and cycles. For the present, his worth is not known, but in future it will be inestimably clear. His sun will ever be shining. His star will ever bestow the light. The poor will honor this grave. Therefore, the friends of God must visit this grave, and on my behalf bring flowers, and seek the sublimity of the spiritual station for him. This personage will not be forgotten." The first group of Baha'is on the American continent included some outstanding people whose names are familiar. Louisa A. Moore. She married Dr. Edward Getzinger and became Loa Getzinger. Helen Goodall, Isabella Brittingham, Arthur P. Dodge, Howard MacNutt. He became one of the first people to travel around the world in response to the tablets of the divine plan. May Ellis Bowles, who became May Maxwell and the mother of Abdu'l Baha Ruhir Khanum. She heard of the faith from Loa Getzinger, and in her turn became a shining teacher of the course. Another person who heard of the faith from Loa was Mrs. Phoebe Hearst, the wife of Senator George F. Hearst of the Hearst newspaper fame. In 1898, Mrs. Hearst decided to go to the Holy Land to meet Abdu'l Baha, and she invited several Baha'is to go with her. These included Edward and Loa Getzinger, Dr. Kairullah and his wife. By then, the number of American Baha'is could be counted in hundreds. The rise of the faith in the West compensated for the dishonor brought upon the cause and the confusion brought about amongst both friends and enemies of the faith by the covenant breakers in the Middle East. The power of the covenant was becoming apparent. In Paris, a number of Americans living there joined the pilgrims. Among them were two nieces of Mrs. Hearst, Mrs. Thornborough and her daughter, Miriam Thornborough Cropper. Well, Mrs. Thornborough Cropper was actually the first Baha'i in the British Isles, although she wasn't British, And for some time, you may have seen in the Hazrat al-Quds in London a portrait of a very beautiful and youngish woman. And on it, it would have said, Lady Blomfield. In fact, it was a portrait of Mrs. Thornborough Cropper. And now it is named for Mrs. Thornborough Cropper. And May Bowles joined them too. She was in Paris. More joined the party in Egypt, so they totaled 15. And because of the situation in the Holy Land at that time, they divided themselves into 3 groups. And the first group arrived in Akka on December 10th, 1898. It was the first time that Baha'is raised up in the Christian West had come into the presence face to face of Abdu'l Baha. And in this book, Abdu'l Baha, Mr. Belusi asked, what was the impact of this meeting? How did the pilgrims respond? And over 30 years later, Mrs. Thornborough Cropper wrote about it. And here it is. She said, we then took a small, miserable boat to Haifa. That was a boat from Egypt. There was a storm here also, and we were beaten about unmercifully in our all too inadequate steamer. Upon arrival, we went to an hotel, where we remained until nightfall, as it was too dangerous for us and for Abdu'l Baha, for strangers to be seen entering the city of sorrow. We took a carriage after the night had fallen and drove along the hard sand by, and she quotes, way of the sea beyond Jordan, unquote, which led us to the gates of the prison city. There, our trusted driver arranged for us to enter. Once inside, we found the friends who were waiting for us, and we started up the uneven stairs that led to him. This was the house of Abdullah Pasha with the uneven stairs. Someone went before us with a small piece of candle, which cast strange shadows on the wall on this silent place. Suddenly, the light caught a form that at first seemed a vision of mist and light. It was the Master, which the candlelight had revealed to us. His white robe and silver flowing hair and shining blue eyes gave the impression of a spirit rather than a human being. We tried to tell him how deeply grateful we were at his receiving us. No, he answered, you are kind to come. Then he smiled, and we recognized the light which he possessed in the radiance which moved over his fine and noble face. It was an amazing experience. We 4 visitors from the Western world forgot that our voyage, with all its accompanying inconvenience, was a small price to pay for such treasure as we received from the spirit and words of the Master, whom we had crossed mountains and seas and nations to meet. This began our work to spread the teachings, to mention the name of Baha'u'llah, and to acquaint the world with this message. Mrs. Phoebe Hurst, who, as you know, had originally planned the pilgrimage, wrote a year later in answer to an inquiry. Although my stay in Akka was very short, as I was there only 3 days, yet I assure you, those 3 days were the most memorable days of my life. Still, I feel incapable of describing them in the slightest degree. From a material standpoint, everything was very simple and plain. But the spiritual atmosphere which pervaded the place and was manifested in the lives and actions among the believers was truly wonderful and something I had never experienced before. One needs but to see them to know that they are a holy people. The Master I will not attempt to describe. I will only state that I believe with all my heart that he is the Master, and my greatest blessing in this world is that I have been privileged to be in his presence and look upon his sanctified face. His life is truly the Christ life, and his whole being radiates with purity and holiness. Without a doubt, Abbas Effendi is the Messiah of this day and generation, and we need not look for another. And the younger member of the party was May Ellis Bowles. She said, "In a moment I stood on the threshold and dimly saw a room full of people sitting quietly about the walls. And then I beheld my beloved. I found myself at his feet, and he gently raised me and seated me beside him, all the while saying some loving words in Persian in a voice that shook my heart. Of that first meeting, I can remember neither joy nor pain, nor anything that I can name. I had been carried suddenly to greater height. My soul had come in contact with the divine spirit, and this force, so pure, so holy, so mighty, had overwhelmed me. He spoke to each one of us in turn of ourselves and our lives and those whom we loved. And although his words were so few and so simple, they breathed the spirit of life to our souls. We could not remove our eyes from his glorious face. We heard all he said. We drank tea with him at his bidding. But existence seemed suspended. And when he arose and suddenly left us, we came back to life with a start. But never again, thank God, to the same life on this earth. We had beheld the King of Beauty. We had seen the land which is very far off. May Bowles made, after that, a stay of a few more days in Haifa, and Abdu'l Baha told the pilgrims that on Sunday morning he would meet them on Mount Carmel, under the shade of the trees where Baha'u'llah had sat and rested. But May Bowles fell ill, and the Master went to visit her on that Sunday. He felt her pulse and then said, "There will be no meeting on Mount Carmel today. We could not go and leave one of the beloved of God alone and sick. We could none of us be happy unless all the beloved were happy." We were astonished that anything so important as this meeting in that blessed spot should be cancelled because one person was ill and could not go seemed to be incredible. It was so contrary to all ordinary habits of thought and action, so different from the life of the world where daily events and material circumstances are supreme in importance. It gave us a genuine shock of surprise. And in that shock, the foundations of the old order began to totter and fall. The Master's words had opened wide the door of God's kingdom and given us a vision of that infinite world whose only law is love. This was but one of the many times that we saw Abdu'l Baha place above every other consideration the love and kindness, the sympathy and compassion due to every soul. Included in the party of pilgrims was Robert Turner, who was Mrs. Hurst's Negro butler. He was destined to be the first of his race on the American continent to accept the faith of Baha'u'llah. And one day the master sat with the pilgrims and he asked where everybody was. And then he noticed that the butler was absent. "Where is Robert?" he inquired. And as soon as that simple, devoted man came into the room, Abdu'l Baha rose to his feet and greeted him affectionately. He made Robert, a servant, sit down with the rest and said, "Robert, your Lord loves you. God gave you a black skin, but a heart as white as snow." The pilgrims could only stay a short time. And when the day came for them to leave, the thought was unbearable. They felt shattered. And Abdu'l Baha told them, "And now I give you a commandment, which shall be for a covenant between you and me, that ye have faith. That your faith be steadfast as a rock, that no storms can move, that nothing can disturb, and that it endure through all things, even to the end. Even should ye hear that your Lord has been crucified, be not shaken in your faith. For I am with you always, whether living or dead. I am with you to the end. As ye have faith, so shall your powers and blessings be." This is the balance. This is the balance. This is the balance. And please remember, Abdu'l Baha said, "Even should ye hear that your Lord has been crucified, be not shaken in your faith." Because that is exactly what Jamal Pasha in the 1914-18 war threatened to do as he moved down to the Suez Canal with the 3rd Army Corps to take over, as he thought, the Suez Canal. And he said when he returned, he would crucify Abdu'l Baha on Mount Carmel. But we'll talk about that tomorrow. Abdu'l Baha gave May Bowles a specific task. He told her to remain in Paris and teach the faith there. And within a few months, she established the first Baha'i center of the European continent. In Britain, Miriam Thornborough Cropper, you remember the photograph, yes, helped in the summer of 1899 to bring the second Baha'i of the British Isles into the fold of the faith. She was Ethel Jenner Rosenberg, an accomplished miniature painter, a very remarkable woman who served and promoted the cause of Baha'u'llah with exemplary devotion for the next 30 years. Now, Miss Rosenberg went for several times to stay in the home of the master for long periods, and she taught the children English for some time. But she has a unique distinction that no one else can have. In a tablet that Abdu'l Baha sent to Miss Rosenberg in reply to a question that she asked about something that it says in the Kitab-i-Aqdas, explained that in what he said in the Kitab-i-Aqdas, Baha'u'llah instituted monogamy. Now, isn't it interesting that this interpretation from Abdu'l Baha came to an elderly spinster who never married? And that tablet of the master was preserved in the archives in the Hazrat al-Quds in London for a long, long time, until the Universal House of Justice, after they had been elected, wrote to the National Spiritual Assembly and asked for the original of that tablet, telling us that it would be quite all right for us to keep a photocopy. So, you see, all sorts of things connect and link up across the years and the generations and the people. Now we're going to look to the story of Thomas Breakwell, because it was in the summer of the year 1901. And Thomas Breakwell was a young Englishman in his 20s, but he was living in the south of the United States because he held a very responsible and lucrative post in a cotton mill there. And he was on holiday in Europe, and May Bowles stayed in Paris. Her mother wished her to take the summer season in Brittany, but Abdu'l Baha had told her that she must on no account absent herself from Paris. My unhappy and indignant mother, May wrote, had closed our home and left me alone. Now, a mutual friend who had noticed that Thomas Bakewell was attracted to themes of mysticism and esoteric thought brought him to meet May Bowles, and one morning she found them outside her door. My attention, she has recorded, was riveted on this youth, of medium height, slender, erect and graceful, with intense eyes and incredible charm. At that first meeting, no mention was made of the faith. They talked of theosophy, and Bakewell thought that his hostess's interest centered around that movement. But May had seen in him, in her own words, a very rare person of high standing and culture, simple, natural, intensely real in his attitude towards life and his fellow men. Bakewell asked if she would permit him to call again the next day, and he came the following morning. And when he arrived, he was in a state of exaltation, and immediately asked May whether she could see anything strange about him. Then he went on to say, "When I was here yesterday, I felt a power, an influence that I had felt once before in my life, when for a period of 3 months I was continually in communion with God. I felt during that time like one moving in a rarefied atmosphere of light and beauty. My heart was afire with love for the Supreme Beloved. I felt at peace, at one with all my fellow men. Yesterday, when I left you, I went alone down the Champs-Élysées. The air was warm and heavy. Not a leaf was stirring. When suddenly a wind struck me and whirled around me. And in that wind a voice said, with an incredible sweetness and penetration, 'Christ has come again. Christ has come again.'" Bakewell asked May Bowles whether she thought that he was parting with his senses, to which she replied, "No, you are just becoming sane." And she told him of the advent of Baha'u'llah. There and then Thomas Bakewell became a Baha'i. But the story of Thomas Bakewell does not end there. His burning desire was to find his way into the presence of Abdu'l Baha. "My Lord, I believe. Forgive me, thy servant, Thomas Bakewell," were the words which conveyed his hope and his allegiance to the Master. Now, it was that very evening, May Bowles wrote, "I went to the concierge of our apartment to get my mail, and there lay a little blue cablegram from Abdu'l Baha. With what wonder and awe I read his words: 'You may leave Paris at any time.' How gratefully my heart dwells on the divine compassion of the Master, on the joy and wonder of my mother as I told her everything. And when she read the Master's cablegram, she burst into tears and exclaimed, 'You have indeed a wonderful Master.'" Abdu'l Baha gave permission for Thomas Bakewell to make the pilgrimage, and he was in Akka in the company of Herbert Hopper, a young American Baha'i also taught by May Bowles. And once again it is to her that we turn for what happened. She said, "They were ushered into a spacious room, at one end of which stood a group of men in Oriental garb. Herbert Hopper's face became irradiated with joy of instant recognition. But Breakwell discerned no one in particular among these men. Feeling suddenly ill and weak, he seated himself near a table with a sense of crushing defeat. Sitting thus, he bitterly lamented. Why had he come here? Why had he abandoned his projected journey and come to this remote prison, seeking he knew not what? Sunk in utter gloom, he was in an instant rescued from his darksome world. The floodgates of light opened upon him. Abdu'l Baha entered the room, and Thomas Breakwell became a changed man. From that moment, Breakwell never looked back. He told Abdu'l Baha the nature of his profession, that his work was worthwhile and his earnings were considerable. But he added that he now had misgivings, because the organization he served was buttressed by child labor. Abdu'l Baha advised him, cable your resignation. He did. He went back to Paris and made it his home. The master wished it. Breakwell did not live very long. He had tuberculosis. When he died, Dr. Yunus Khan was with Abdu'l Baha, and he said, I was accompanying the master in the evening from the house where he received his visitors to his home by the seaside. All of a sudden, he turned to me and said, Have you heard? No, master, I replied. And he said, Breakwell has passed away. I am grieved, very grieved. I have written a prayer of visitation for him. It is very moving, so moving that twice I could not withhold my tears when I was writing it. You must translate it well, so that whoever reads it will weep. Dr. Yunus Khan says, I never knew who had given the master the news of Breakwell's death. If anyone had written or cabled, either in English or in French, that communication would have passed through my hands. 2 days later, the prayer of visitation was given to me. It wrung everyone's heart, and I could not hold back my tears. I translated it into French, and later, with the help of Loa Getzinger, into English. This tablet is long and is wonderful, and it says, O Breakwell, my beloved, where is thy beautiful countenance, and where is thy eloquent tongue, where is thy radiant brow, and where is thy brilliant face? And then it says, O my adored one, O Breakwell, then thou hast ignited a light in the glass of the supreme concourse, hast entered the paradise of Abha, art protected under the shade of the blessed tree, and hast attained to the meeting of the Lord of truth in the abode of heaven. And so each one of these stanzas. But even that is not the end. Dr. Yunus Khan writes, a year later, Abdu'l Baha called me one day to his presence to give me letters to translate. There were many envelopes sent from various places. While examining them, still sealed, he, all of a sudden, picked out one and said, How pleasing is the fragrance that emanates from this envelope. Make haste, open it, and see where it comes from. Make haste. Previously, it had happened many a time that the master had picked up a particular envelope to be opened first, and of a certainty The letter therein had contained news of great spiritual import. Now I hurried to open this particular envelope selected by the master. In it there was a postcard. The postcard was coloured a beautiful shade, and attached to it was one solitary flower, a violet. Written in letters of gold were these words: "He is not dead. He lives on in the kingdom of God." Further, there was this sentence: "This flower was picked from Breakwell's grave." When I told the master what the message of the postcard was, he at once rose up from his seat, took the card, put it on his blessed brow, and tears flowed down his cheeks. There are so many stories, and there is not time for any more of them. But we have to look to another American of a family established in Paris, because it was at the dawn of the 20th century that Laura Clifford Barney became a Baha'i. She visited Akka 6 times and stayed several months. It was during these visits, stretched over several years, that the unique book took shape, which we know as Some Answered Questions. Questions were put to Abdu'l Baha by Laura Barney, and the master answered them. By then, Abdu'l Baha had moved to the house of Abdullah Pasha, still in Akka, where Shoghi Effendi was born. And it was at the table in the small dining room there that Laura Barney's questions were answered. Now, as part of the pilgrimage, we visit that house, and some of you may have been in it. Have any of you been in it? The house of Abdullah Pasha? Abdu'l Baha said to Laura Barney when he got up from one meal and was moving away, "I have given you my tired moments." But we must turn our attention to another part of the world, to Russian Turkestan, where a new town had sprung up that came to be called Ashgabat. Ashgabat is close to the Iranian province of Khorasan, close to the border. And Persian Baha'is, harassed in their native land, were attracted to Ashgabat, and so were other Iranians. And among those were men who disliked the Baha'is, some through sheer prejudice, some through envy. And there were adventurers and hirelings who, wherever they go, look for trouble. In September 1889, plottings led to the murder of a Baha'i from Isfahan, Haji Muhammad Riza, and in broad daylight, in the middle of the bazaar, he was attacked and stabbed to death by 2 hired assassins. The police arrested these men, but the lives of other Baha'is were in danger. And the accusation against the martyred Haji was that he had spoken disparagingly of the Imams. That was said to have aroused the wrath of men who were deeply religious. Mirza Abul Fazl happened to be in Ashgabat at that time, and he sought a meeting with the Russian governor and put the case for the Baha'is. He said that they believed in and honored all the manifestations of God. Their faith enjoined upon them to live in harmony with the followers of all religions. They, too, revered the Imams. The Imams, of course, are those apostolic successors to Muhammad, of the family of the Prophet. So Mirza Abul Fazl said that the Baha'is too revered the Imams, whom the Shias revered. The Tsar, Alexander III, sent a military commission from St. Petersburg, which of course is now Leningrad, to conduct the trial. And the outcome was that the two who murdered Haji Muhammad Riza were sentenced to death, and 6 others involved in the plot were ordered to be transported to Siberia. And all efforts made to get the verdict for the men who were to be killed, changed, failed. But at the last moment, it was announced that the Baha'ís had interceded for the murderers. And so they too were banished to Siberia. And the Baha'ís gained greatly in prestige through that action. And Mr. Berluzzi wrote about this, and it's very interesting what it led to. Because Mr. Berluzzi said that the ground was now prepared for the initiation of enterprises, such as the establishment of schools, libraries, and the construction of a house of worship, the Mashriq al-Ashqa. And the task of raising that edifice in Ishkabad was entrusted by Abdu'l Baha to Haji Mirza Muhammad Taqi, the son of Haji Sayyid Muhammad, the uncle of the Bab, for whom Baha'u'llah had revealed the Kitab-i-Iqan. The general design of the house of worship of Ishkabad was delineated by Abdu'l Baha himself, and a Russian architect, Volkov, planned and executed the details of the construction. The cornerstone of the Mashriq al-Ashqa was laid in December 1902 in the presence of leading officials, and thereafter the work went ahead without interruption. By the year 1907, the dome of the temple was in place, and Haji Mirza Muhammad Taqi had used the larger part of his own fortune to rear that noble building. Now Abdu'l Baha invited him to visit Akka, and he reached the Holy Land at the close of the year. Now, an eyewitness to the Hajj's arrival was Dr. Habib Moyet, and he was one of the doctors of Abdu'l Baha that some of us knew. And he gave a picture of the meeting between Abdu'l Baha and the Haji. He said the small boat bringing the latter ashore had been overwhelmed by high waves, and he had been thrown into the sea. At his advanced age, the experience was alarming and left him very weak. Abdu'l Baha, much concerned about his health and comfort, told the pilgrims that he and they would all go together and call on the Afnan. All that he could return to Abdu'l Baha's tender inquiries was to recite the first line of a famous couplet, unable to complete it. Thy presence I craved, to thee I open my heart. Haji Mirza Muhammad Taqi lived the rest of his life in the Holy Land. All who have visited the cemetery there will have seen his resting place. He died in Haifa in the year 1911. He lies next to the grave of John Ebenezer Esselmans, of the family of tea importers in Aberdeen, although Dr. Esselmans himself was a tuberculosis specialist. He died of the disease in which he specialized. He's buried in Haifa. So the East and the West lie side by side. In Cairo, it is the same, where the graves of Mirza Abul Fazl and Lua Getzinger adjoin each other. It was to this cousin of the Bab that Abdu'l Baha has addressed these prophetic words when he himself stood in great peril. And some of these things that we have read, I'm sure you all recognize, but now you know the circumstances in which they were revealed. How great, how very great is the cause. How very fierce the onslaught of all the peoples and kindreds of the earth. Ere long shall the clamor of the multitude throughout Africa, throughout America, the cry of the European and of the Turk, the groaning of India and China, be heard from far and near. One and all they shall arise with all their power to resist his course. Then shall the knights of the Lord, assisted by his grace from on high, strengthened by faith, aided by the power of understanding, and reinforced by the legions of the covenant, arise and make manifest the truth of the verse, behold the confusion that hath befallen the tribes of the defeated. Tomorrow we shall proceed to Abdu'l Baha's release after more than 40 years of exile and imprisonment.